Gura Mahagat Cahirlik, and I'd like first to thank my independent group colleagues, particularly Senator Craughwell, for swapping their time with us. I think it is appropriate, and I thank you, Senator Craughwell, in light of the unusual origins of this bill, that we would have the opportunity to lead for the opposition on this, and I'm delighted to do so. I'd like to welcome you to the House, Minister, and also to just to ask you to pass on our words of thanks to Minister McEntee, who's done so much to pilot this bill through, following its initiation in the Dáil 3 years ago by my Labour colleague, Deputy Brendan Howlin. And I do want to pay tribute to Deputy Howlin, who led on this issue from the start, who initiated the legislation, and whose enormous contribution to law reform in this area has been acknowledged very fairly, I think, by all in the Dáil and indeed in this House also. And I'm delighted, Minister, to see the revised explanatory memorandum published with this bill this week, recognising the role of Deputy Brendan Howlin, recognising the fact that this bill did start as an opposition Labour Party bill that has now been, if you like, taken up by government and engage through constructive engagement process with Deputy Howlin, has been steered through the Dáil with support from all parties and from all independents, and I hope we'll have the same smooth progress, but with robust debate through this House also. And I also, of course, want to pay tribute to the extraordinary campaigning work of so many whose lives have been so severely affected by the scourge of online abuse and of digital bullying and so on. And that is in particular to the mother of Nicole Coco Fox Fenland, Jackie Fox, whose daughter Nicole had the nickname Coco and who took her own life very tragically in 2018 at the young age of 21, following years of being subjected to vicious abuse and bullying online. And again, to thank you and the Minister for revising the explanatory memorandum. And I just read that the content of this bill, as it states in the memorandum, is strongly influenced by persons who have lost their lives because of online abuse, in particular Nicole Fox. The bill is in recognition of her mother's determination to honour the memory of her daughter and to strengthen the law so that others can be safer. As a result, this bill can be referred to as Coco's Law. And I think that's a really fitting way of marking the enormous contribution to law reform made by Nicole's mother and by the other families of bereaved families who've lost young people to suicide as a result often of serious online abuse and bullying. And indeed, Deputy Howlin hosted an incredibly moving event outside Leinster House some months ago, which I know a number of colleagues attended, where we heard directly from Jackie Fox and from other parents as to the seriously detrimental effect that online bullying had on their own children and their own and teenagers. And I think that brought home to many of us the very serious nature of this phenomenon and the need for law reform on this area. However, Deputy Howlin had, as I say, pioneered this and indeed had introduced this bill originally in 2017. Now, it has, thanks to the sort of galvanising of support from across the House and indeed thanks to the Minister's support too, it has been moved on much more swiftly in this Oireachtas term, and for that I thank colleagues. And that's why, in the interest of seeing it passed into law now without any further delay, we have listed it to be taken through all stages today, and that was by assent of all of us represented at a recent Leaders and Whips meeting. I know that many NGOs have also engaged very constructively in the process and are anxious to see this bill become law. And I note the very powerful message sent to us by Safe Ireland last night by way of email, asking for the swift passage of this law and asking that we should ensure no further delays. And I want to pay tribute to Safe Ireland and the Rape Crisis Network and indeed all the other NGOs that have been so actively engaged on the bill, including the National Women's Council and of course Women's Aid, who've done so much great work to support survivors and victims of domestic abuse through the recent months. And I know that Women's Aid and others are seeking further improvements to the bill, even at this late hour. But I would say, and I think colleagues appreciate, that there is an imperative now to get this bill passed, to ensure that we do have, for the first time, a robust legal framework to protect those who are suffering from online abuse and harassment, including the sort of sharing of intimate images that we've seen reported on in recent months. it is, of course, at any point then subject to further amendment once it is introduced. And I would quote from Deputy Howlin, who on this point during the report stage debate yesterday in the Dáil pointed out that the one thing I am very clear on is that there is no end to the amendments we could actually consider. People have been contacting me about this over the years, but especially recently. Since there is such an urgent need for legislation in this area, our objective should be to establish a framework. As I said in my opening comments, the framework should not be the final word by any stretch of the imagination. We will be building on it, and new technologies will have to be addressed in the future. And I think you referred yourself, Minister, to this as an evolving bill. So I think that's right, that this provides us with a first robust statutory framework. But clearly it would have to be built upon. It would have to be built upon, indeed, as the Law Reform Commission pointed out in 2016, through the enactment of further legislation to deal with civil remedies for online abuse and harassment. And that's clearly not being dealt with in this bill, which is indeed a criminal bill, as Deputy Howlin has pointed out. And it will also have to be dealt with, as he said, Minister, through other mechanisms beyond law reform, through, for example, education programmes and through the establishment of the sort of awareness-raising programmes that you've also spoken about. And, you know, it will take further legislation to establish, for example, the Digital Safety Commissioner that the Law Reform Commission called for in 2016. So we are conscious that our priority today should be to get this bill passed, but to recognise that there may well be further legislation required, and indeed is further legislation required, to deal with other aspects of online abuse and harassment. And I think we're also cognisant that the bill was amended quite extensively, as you've said, Minister, at committee stage and even at report stage yesterday in the Dáil. I think yesterday and at committee stage, the Minister McEntee had indicated that there's a Justice Miscellaneous Provisions Bill coming before the Oireachtas next year, and that issues could be addressed, any issues with this bill could also be addressed through that. So I think that we would be conscious that there is scope for further evolution of the law in this area, and particularly given the speed at which technology is changing. And indeed, even in the 3 years since Deputy Howlin first introduced this bill, and the 4 years since the Law Reform Commission issued its important report on harmful communications and digital safety, we've seen quite extensive technological change. Far greater, I think, far greater spread of pervasiveness of social media access by much younger teens, and I speak as a mother of teenagers, so I think we're all conscious that that really has been a feature. Other colleagues have mentioned in this House in previous debates the really visible coarsening and degrading of discourse online, of public discourse, of the sort of abuse that all of us have received as public representatives. And I must say, in recent weeks, just in respect particularly of our citizenship law and Born Here, Belong Here campaign, I know that I and other Labour representatives have received really horrible abuse online. So I think we're all aware of that, and that's certainly been a changing landscape which we have to navigate and which we have to address within our laws. And, you know, as Deputy Howlin has pointed out, this bill is certainly long overdue, even though we do recognise that further evolution will be necessary. Some of the law it seeks to reform is law that is half a century old, the Post Office Amendment Act of 1951 relating to communications. Even the much more recent 1997 Non-Fatal Offences Against the Person Act, which itself was a major consolidating piece of legislation, is now 23 years old, and so much has changed in that time. So just, Minister, to speak very briefly about the content of the bill itself and about the way in which it is now coming to us. Essentially, it seeks to address two different aspects of online abuse and harassment. First, the sharing of intimate images, online sexual abuse that we've seen reported on so widely recently, non-consensual sharing of intimate images of women and girls, which has caused such alarm in recent months. And that aspect of online abuse is being dealt with through sections 2 and 3 of the bill. And I think that we see in those sections a clear framework for dealing with the more serious aspect, which is the intentional or reckless sharing or distribution of intimate images, which carries that maximum penalty of 7 years and is provided for in section 2, and which therefore, because it is a more serious offence, has a higher threshold to meet for the prosecution. And, you know, I think, having looked at it extensively, I think again that fits within our criminal law framework adequately. And then, of course, we see in section 3 the less serious offence, which is a strict liability offence, doesn't require proof of intention or recklessness, offencelessness, and which therefore carries a lesser penalty, but which also addresses that terrible harm of recording, distributing or publishing an intimate image without consent. So I think that's, that scheme is a clear and robust scheme. The second aspect of online harassment relates to the online bullying and harassment that doesn't involve the sharing of intimate images, and that's dealt with through two provisions in the bill. Section 4, which creates the new offence of distributing, publishing or sending threatening or grossly offensive communication, which carries a 2-year penalty and which is crucial. It's a crucial reform that's long overdue because it covers the sort of once-off abuse, the sending of a single abusive message, which currently we've no law to address in place. Importantly, the bill also, through Section 10, updates the existing offence of harassment in Section 10 of the 1997 Act. As you say, Minister, expands the definition of that so that it's not just communicating with somebody, but now, crucially, also communicating about them. So the sort of horrible bullying we see taking place online, where people are vilified through posts or messages to others. And we see also an increase in the penalty, the existing penalty for the harassment offence, from 7 to 10 years. So again, I think that's a good scheme. We have two, if you like, graded offences under each heading, under the heading of the sharing of intimate images and under the heading of more general online bullying and harassment. So I think, Deputy Howland spoke about the motivation into introducing the bill. I just wanted to conclude with his point that this bill is based upon a fundamental view that the internet and the use of social media and online space generally is a public space, and people who use that public space should be protected there and their behaviour regulated in the same way that we regulate behaviours in a public street or a public park. Now, clearly we have to be mindful also of balancing protections against the right of free speech and free communication, and we have to recognise the enormous benefits of that the internet and social media platforms have brought us. But it is fair that we regulate that space, and that's really the purpose behind this bill. The bill also contains important safeguards, such as the provision in Section 8 that children can only be prosecuted with the consent of the DPP, and again I think that's right and proper. And I think, as I say, we're all mindful of the need to ensure a balancing of this more serious offences and on a higher threshold. But finally, we are anxious to have the bill passed in both houses before Christmas. We want to give relief and succour and reassurance to the many people, the women and girls, the teens and the young adults who've suffered bullying online, who've suffered abuse online, and who will continue to suffer from such bullying, and who want to see, as their families do, who want to see some measure of redress and some measure of accountability for their harassers and the perpetrators. And in particular, they want to know that there is a robust legal framework to protect them, and this bill Minister can provide that robust legal framework. And on behalf of the Labour Group who initiated this legislation, I'm delighted to speak in support of it today and to ask colleagues across the House for their support, and to thank you, Cathaoirleach, for your leeway in giving me a little extra time today. Gura maith.